what do we all have to agree on before we can start making a roadmap? Medical policies are constantly changing. We have to agree on that. That happens every day. You see it every day in your practice. They're going to use that medical policy to change the underlying things that you're going to be required to show in your medical record. Payers are incentivized to pay providers rather than issue denials. So at the end of the day, they want to pay because they want to make the 15 cents. And they know that they're going to have the opportunity to take that money back 6 to 12 months from now. So as long as there's not one of those statutory limits that we talked about, the 6, 12 months, that look back period that they're allowed to go back and take monies back. And by the way, that's an important issue too. Always make sure you know what your state allows. It'll typically, once again, be in that prompt pay law. How far back can they actually go? And I've seen insurance carriers time and again go twice as long as they're legally allowed to go, because at the end of the day, as the payer, or as the provider or the organization, if you don't contest it, you're going to pay that money back without effectually taking advantage of the law and limiting that. So medical policy, who's monitoring that for you, right? So I've been around the country. I've asked hundreds of different healthcare entities about this, from DME to practices to ambulatory surgery centers. The one response I get that's consistent is, oh, my biller does that for me. And that response always means that no one's doing it for you. Not that billers are not capable of doing it, but billers don't have the ability to look at the medical necessity, understand what's in your documentation, and cause you to make changes to what you do. That's not what they do. They push your data through a scrubber, through the clearinghouse, and you're going to catch some stuff. But remember what we said 65% was? Medical necessity, lack of documentation. Is any clearinghouse going to catch that? None. Okay, so we know that that biller is not going to be covering you for the vast majority of what's changing in your market. The next response I get is, well, my EHR company, they're changing all the time, and I'm gonna, they're gonna make those changes, and it's built in. Well, there are ones that get smarter over time, but they get smarter because people have been denied, people have had overpayments, and so eventually when they get enough of them, they make rules. But at the end of the day, they're dealing with so many vast different types of providers, different types of entities, that what you'll find is if they do make changes, they're about 180 days behind when a change actually happened. And there's so many changes that they don't have the ability to monitor and manage those changes. So you're not getting that in your EHR. So if you're not getting your EHR, EMR, and you're not getting it from your biller, pretty much just leaves one other person to do it, and that's you guys. It's the folks who are actually in the practice, in the organization, managing those changes. And like I said, at the end of the day, it's a bad strategy to go, I'm gonna be okay with learning about it because somebody's sending me a letter saying I gotta pay them back money. There's a better way. So what is that better way? Our goal is, let's develop a policy to track changes. How do you manage that in your practice? This is basically a sample policy that you could implement in your practice about managing those medical policy changes. Don't have to start off doing it all in one day. I would suggest looking at your highest paid reimbursement codes. You can look at things that are high dollar and also high volume for your practice. Check on those things once a month. Put a process in place that's going to say, okay, we're going to review these 10 codes every 30 days to make sure that the 5 or 6 or 10 carriers that pay us, that make up the substantial amount of money, that we're at least looking at those so that we can set a time in that says, well, we're not going to be any later than 30 days. We might have missed the 30 days, but we're not going to be any later. So at least you're giving yourself a chance. Remember when we talked about being proactive in the investigative process? That's a really good event to be able to say, how are you being proactive to make sure that you're keeping up with things that you're supposed to be keeping up with? How about the fact that you're monitoring medical policy, which is the vast majority of why you're going to have an overpayment request? That's a pretty good piece to say, hey, listen, this is my preventative measure. I am being proactive. Once again, you really want a systematic approach. We say calendar it, create a log, create a system in place so that you guys can figure out how to identify the times when it's going to change, and then not only, okay, so we figured out something changed. This comes the hard part. Once you know something changed, then you've got to push it all the way through the system, right? So, because, doctors are adverse to change, right? So, getting them to going them and saying, hey, you got to include this in your medical records or because this just changed, that's tough, right? I do think, though, you could use your relationships with your EMR, your EHR to push those changes through. If you find a critical change, call your person at your EMR company and say, we need to have this put into our medical record. Make them do the work, and then the doctor has to fill out that box in order to be able to continue to go through. So, I mean, you can utilize your existing resources to make it happen. Implementation, and that's kind of what we were talking about. How do you effectively implement those processes? It takes people. It's going to take time, and you have to realize how important it is to your bottom line to commit those resources. You will get that value back if you commit the resources. Obviously, a log, once again, is a good way to track it. What you'll find, this is interesting, when you go to see a policy change, they'll go ahead and change the insurance company will change the policy, but then they will not give you they won't give you the policy that was changed from. So you could say, oh, okay, there's a policy change. If you didn't track what it was before, and somebody asks for recoupment back, you're sitting there with an existing policy that was changed, but have no idea what happened before that time. So I think there's tools that you can utilize. A log is one. I think there are tools, though, that you can utilize that'll allow you to be able to track those relatively easy. So what do we do with our newfound information? We know that medical necessity and lack of documentation is where we're going to lose our money. Where they're going to take our money back. So that begs the question, okay, let's go ahead and fix those two things. That's primarily what we need to fix. One option, do nothing. Just respond to overpayment requests with large checks. That's not a good option. Unfortunately, about 65% of the people, that's their option. Don't be that person. Third-party consultants can work. Auditors, big data analytics, they usually can find those patterns in your data to be able to draw it back. But once again, it's typically retrospective. It's not going to tell you, hey, something's happening, you haven't gotten a letter yet. So you really need to, typically that's a pretty expensive event to manage the process in that way. Not that it's not worth it, but at the end of the day, I believe there's more cost-effective ways to manage that process. Get proactive. Okay, establish some kind of policy. That's step one. Even if you just have the policy and then you take a time to start trying to implement little pieces of it, I think that's really important. If you get a denial and you get an overpayment, look at the medical policy before you send them the records. What always happens now, we did that 20 years ago. Sent the records in, off and running. We got paid 60, 70% of the time. Look at your medical policy when you get a denial. Look at it before you get an overpayment. You should never send your medical records to an insurance carrier, the federal government, state entity until you've reviewed the medical policy and see how that stacks up to your medical records. Because the end game is my medical records equal all of the medical policies out there. If they do that, then you're going to be locked solid when it comes to managing denials and managing overpayments. It's my one shameless plug here is if you use medical policy change monitoring software, we actually created a company to be able to monitor all the CPT codes across all insurance payers to make sure that we know when things change and also track it. It came from a need in our ancillary company, and so there are tools out there like ours that will help you manage that process and give you an item of being proactive. So I would suggest if it's not us, even if it's establishing your own process, your own policy, make sure you make something happen related to how you're going to track these changes. The really good news is that I finished early, and so everybody's always happy about that. I think they indicated that there's some kind of speaker review. So if you liked what you heard, I'm Brian Panessa. All 10s would be great. If you didn't, I'm John Smith in Exhibit Hall B. A is an apple. Thank you.